My son called me and said, "I'm getting married tomorrow." Then he laughed and added, "I already took all the money and sold the house." I didn't argue. Because he had no idea what that house actually was. Before I go any further, let me say this quietly. If you believe betrayal hurts most when it comes from family, please stay with me until the end. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. My name is Margaret Collins. I'm 72 years old. And this is the hardest story I've ever lived through. For most of my life, I believed in simple rules. If you worked hard, if you loved your family, if you sacrificed without keeping score, then life would eventually return that kindness. I believed being a good mother meant safety in old age. I was wrong. I lived in a modest home in a quiet American neighborhood, nothing luxurious, nothing that would ever make anyone jealous, but it was mine. My husband and I bought that house when we were young and hopeful, back when interest rates felt scary and our hands shook signing the papers. We painted the walls ourselves. We fixed what we could afford and ignored what we couldn't. That house saw us become parents. It heard our arguments. It carried our laughter. And when my husband passed away, it became more than a house. It became proof that my life had meant something. Every corner held a memory. The kitchen where he brewed coffee every morning, always too strong. The hallway where our son ran through the house with scraped knees. The bedroom where I learned how quiet grief can be at night. After my husband died, people kept telling me the same thing. At least you have your son. He'll look after you. You're not alone. And I believed them. Because when you're a mother, you don't prepare your heart for betrayal from your own child. My son was my only child. I raised him carefully. Sometimes too carefully. I worked long hours while he was growing up. I skipped vacations. I stretched groceries. I said maybe next year to myself more times than I can count. I told myself it was all worth it. Because one day, when I was tired, he would stand by me. As the years passed, I started to slow down, not dramatically, just enough to notice. Paperwork felt heavier. Bank statements looked longer than they used to. Legal language made my head ache. I could still manage, but it took effort. That's when my son began to help. "Mom, let me take care of that," he said. "These things are easier for me." He went with me to the bank. He organized accounts. He explained things quickly, confidently. When papers needed signing, he pointed to where my name should go. "Just routine," he'd say. "Nothing to worry about." And I trusted him. Because a mother doesn't read between the lines when her child is speaking. She listens with love, not suspicion. Slowly, I stopped asking questions, not because I didn't care, but because he always sounded annoyed when I did. "Mom, you don't need to stress about this. Everything's fine. I've got it under control." So I let him. That was my mistake. Over time, he changed. Not suddenly, quietly. He visited less, called less. When he did come by, he was distracted, always on his phone, always checking the time. Conversations became shallow. "How are you?" "Fine." "Good," that was it. One afternoon, months before the call that changed everything, he mentioned marriage, just once. "I've been seeing someone," he said casually. "I might settle down." I smiled. I told him I was happy for him. I told him a home feels warmer with another person in it. He nodded, barely listening. I didn't realize that was the beginning of the end. The night he called me, it was late, later than he ever called. The phone rang and something inside my chest tightened. Mothers feel these things before they understand them. I answered. His voice was excited, almost rushed. "Mom," he said, "I'm getting married tomorrow." I was shocked. But I congratulated him. I asked why he hadn't told me sooner. Then he laughed, not a joyful laugh, a careless one. And then his tone changed. "I already withdrew the money," he said. At first, I didn't understand. "What money?" I asked. "All of it," he replied. "The savings, the accounts." My hand tightened around the phone. Before I could speak, he added the words that made the room feel like it was closing in. "I sold the house too." I remember looking around me. At the walls that had protected me. At the furniture I had kept for decades. At the place I believed I would die peacefully. I asked him why. His answer was simple. "You don't need it anymore," he said. "You're old. You'll manage." I asked him where I was supposed to live. He paused. "We'll figure it out," he said. Then, as if the conversation meant absolutely nothing, he said one word. "Bye." The line went dead. The silence afterward was unbearable. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I sat very still. And in that stillness, something inside me broke and something else hardened. I realized my son didn't see me as his mother anymore. He saw me as a problem, something to remove, something in the way of his new life. I thought about every sacrifice. Every night I stayed awake worrying about him. Every time I chose his future over my comfort. And for the first time in my life, I felt completely alone. But I also felt something unfamiliar. Clarity. That night I didn't call him back. I didn't beg. I didn't argue. I sat in that house, the house he believed was already gone, and I thought. I thought about the documents I had signed, the meetings I had attended, the moments I had trusted without understanding. And slowly, carefully, I began to realize something my son never expected. There were details he had overlooked, assumptions he had made, steps he had rushed. And while he was celebrating his new life, believing he had erased mine, I was sitting quietly, putting the pieces together. That night, I let him believe he had won. And that decision, to stay silent, would change everything. I sat there long after the call ended. The house was quiet, but it wasn't empty. It was full of thoughts I had avoided for years. I walked slowly from room to room, touching the walls the way someone touches a familiar face. I stopped at the desk where my husband used to keep our paperwork. Most of it was old. Some of it I hadn't opened in years. That night I didn't sleep. Not because I was panicking, but because something inside me had switched on. I replayed every conversation, every document, every moment my son rushed me. And then I remembered something small. Something I had dismissed at the time because it seemed unimportant. A phrase a bank officer had used years ago. A sentence an attorney had said quietly, almost as an afterthought. At the time, I hadn't understood it fully. But now, in the silence of that house, it came back to me clearly. The next morning, I made coffee like I always did. I sat at the kitchen table like nothing had changed. Then I picked up the phone. The first call wasn't dramatic. It wasn't emotional. It was practical. I called the bank. I asked simple questions. Calm ones. I gave my name, my date of birth, my account details. There was a pause on the other end. Then the woman said something that made my heart beat faster, not with fear, but with confirmation. "Mrs. Collins," she said carefully, "some of these transactions require clarification." Clarification. That word stayed with me. I thanked her and hung up. The second call was to an attorney, not a family friend, not someone my son knew. Someone neutral, someone paid to listen. I explained everything slowly. The accounts, the documents, the signatures, the sale. There was a long silence on the line. Then he said, "Mrs. Collins, I need to see the paperwork." That afternoon, I gathered everything I could find. Folders, envelopes, notes scribbled in my own handwriting. I didn't rush. I didn't panic. I moved carefully, like someone assembling evidence, because that's exactly what I was doing. When I met the attorney, he didn't interrupt me. He let me speak. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "Your son moved very fast," he said, "and that was his mistake." He explained things I wish I had understood earlier. About consent, about capacity, about authority, about assumptions people make when they think someone is old enough to ignore. Some signatures weren't final. Some permissions weren't absolute. Some transfers weren't legally clean. And the house was not as simple as my son believed. There were protections in place. Ones my husband had insisted on years ago. Once my son never bothered to fully review. The attorney looked at me and said something I'll never forget. "He thought you were powerless," he said, "but the law doesn't work on assumptions." That evening my phone rang. It was my son. I watched it ring. I didn't answer. He called again, then again. Messages started coming in, short ones at first. "Call me, we need to talk." Then the tone changed. "Why are you doing this? You're embarrassing me." I still didn't respond, because for the first time in my life I wasn't reacting, I was choosing. Over the next few days, things unraveled quickly. The house sale stalled. Funds were frozen. Questions were asked. My son showed up at the house unannounced. He looked different, less confident, less certain. He stood in the doorway like a stranger. "What did you do?" he asked. I looked at him calmly. "I asked questions," I said. He raised his voice, accused me of ruining his plans, of being selfish. I listened. Then I said something that stopped him from getting a cold. "You took everything," I said quietly, "and you never once asked if I would survive without it." He didn't answer. He left angry, slamming the door the way he used to as a teenager. But this time I didn't feel the need to follow him. Days passed, then weeks. The marriage still happened, but not the way he imagined. The money wasn't there. The house wasn't available. The certainty he had relied on disappeared. People started asking him questions he couldn't answer. And slowly, very slowly, he began to understand what he had done. One afternoon, he came back. This time, he didn't shout. He sat across from me at the kitchen table. The same table where I had once helped him with homework. The same table where I had fed him when money was tight. "I didn't think it would be like this," he said. I nodded. "That's because you didn't think about me at all," I replied. He looked down. "I just thought," he began. I stopped him. "No," I said. "You assumed." There was a long silence. Then he asked something I never thought I would hear. "Are you going to forgive me?" I looked at him for a long time. "I'm not punishing you," I said. "I'm protecting myself." Forgiveness is something people ask for when consequences arrive. But protection is something you give yourself when you realize no one else will. Eventually, things settled. The house remained mine. The funds were secured. My future, while still uncertain, was no longer erased. My relationship with my son changed forever. Not with shouting, not with revenge, but with boundaries. He calls now. Less often, more carefully. And when he does, he speaks differently. As if he finally understands that I am not an object to be managed, but a person who deserves dignity. I still live in the same house. I still sit by the window in the mornings. I still drink my coffee slowly. But I am not the same woman I was before that call. I learned something important. Love does not mean surrendering your rights. Trust does not mean blind obedience. And motherhood does not require silence when you are being erased. If you're listening to this and feel unseen, if someone you trusted has taken advantage of your kindness, remember this. Strength doesn't disappear with age. Sometimes, it just waits quietly until it's needed most. Thank you for listening to my story. If it stayed with you, if it reminded you of someone you know or of yourself, then it mattered. And that's enough.